So Ethan, as you meet with brands, is there any misconception around what advanced advertising accomplishes for them?
I don't think there's a misconception. I think there's a wide range of ideas of what they want it to accomplish for them, but I don't think you can call any of those misconceptions. I think their agency partners do a really good job of educating them on what the realities are. Then it's just a matter of matching up those realities to their business needs.
So if that's the case, why hasn't this scaled faster? I mean, coming out of this year's upfront, what, maybe 10% of national TV advertising is done against, audiences. So what do you think is missing from that number being 40 or 50? I mean, if everybody understands what the value is.
From our perspective at A+E, as a content distribution company, it's issues of time, effort, and cost. That the reality is doing business outside of Nielsen age gender demos is time consuming. Think about it, with all due respect, I don't work at a major consumer company, but I'm pretty sure they have tons and tons of brands. All of those brands have different outcomes that they need to deliver. How do you work that into an upfront buy, which is by its nature a futures buy? And then there are issues of cost that agencies and advertisers are used to their linear television budgets being almost 100% focused on media impressions. Right. That is not necessarily the case when you move into the advanced world.
So Dominick, what's your perspective from NBCU? Similar? You see anything? You see the world any differently than what Ethan has described?
No, I think we're all dealing with the same problem. There's a legacy business with decades and decades of a specific way to transact, and then all of a sudden, all the viewership behavior started to change and fragment. And I think as a publisher, we sort of enabled it because we do distribute our content into all these different places. And so then we got to figure out how to make this really nice, pretty velvet curtain, and behind the scenes develop solutions that bring it all together so that it is simpler for them to transact. Because other way, just the process of maybe onboarding a first-party data set, right? Think about how much more complicated that is than transacting on adults 25 to 54, right?
Right. So John, you have an interesting sort of career around this space, right? So 15 years ago you were at Navig I'm sorry, I didn't want to bring
the history lesson.
But you've seen, you sort of have a couple of, you have a very interesting perch to sort of evaluate where the industry is. And I think, it's clear that we are awash in data, right? There's no lack of alternative data sets to Nielsen for viewing, client data, other outcome-based data. And it sort of speaks to what Dominick just said. Where do you think we are from having the analytics that'll let us automate this so that this stuff actually can happen at scale?
Yeah, so that is one of the biggest changes since my Navic days, is the availability of this granular data, whether it's through Inscape or through Comcast or the other MVPDs who are making their data available. That's a huge change. In the Navic days, so Navic, we collected set-top box data before it was cool to collect set-top box data. And the knock was that the agencies just wouldn't accept the data because it was so different than the Nielsen rating points. And we would constantly talk about the benefits of this larger data set, but the fact that it didn't fit into like DDS or any of these buying systems just made that none of the agencies wanted to touch it, even though it was perhaps better, and perhaps when we'd go pitch a CMO, the CMO would love the idea of this granular data and what it could do for them. I think that's changed dramatically, and there's much greater acceptance for these alternative data sets. And then feeding it into the analytics to actually create insights from it, not to just pitch data plus math, but that's exactly like what we do, right? Mm-hmm. We take this granular viewing data from Inscape, we take it from our cable operator partners, we take it from streaming platforms, and we create this whole home view of the viewing that's been consumed in a household and layer on top analytics on top of it. Primarily attribution to figure out what ad exposures are leading to outcomes. And we try to make it as easy as possible for our customers like A+E and NBCUniversal to do that. But obviously, there's going to be a lot more work to do because as Ethan was saying, to go from a world where you're selling a rating point which is kind of understood on both sides, to selling business outcomes, is a huge transition to make.
Well, but isn't also some of it, and each of you should comment on it, the industry used to benefit from averages, right? I'm going to sell you a bushel of GRPs Monday through Friday, 3P to 5P. The agency didn't really care where they ran as long as you made your post. You guys, the ad systems tried to average everything out, because if one brand got too many 5 o'clock spots, it may screw up the average for everybody else. Where do you think we are in terms of sort of the analytics around precision for forecasting that's required in this new rule? Because that's what it really asks for, right?
I think that's kind of the key piece. If I think about the day-to-day running of our business, and a lot of ad sales is really about risk management. That is the biggest challenge that we have. That when you're doing risk management against a bushel of adult 18 to 49 impressions where both sides agree on their value, that's pretty easy to do. It becomes much harder when you're trying to collect the apples that have fallen out, of that little bushel. And well, what's the value of an apple that's hit the ground? You can still make cider out of it, but we're not all going to agree on what the value of that is. The solution, it's time and effort and relationships.
But I think that's the problem, right? Because what gets lost in the average is the added value. And if at the end of the day we're trying to show the impact of what advertising on premium content and television can bring to the table, but now all of a sudden you're looking at a 0.2 rating point, I'm really not sure what that's telling you in terms of, oh, but by the way, most of that was your prospect list. And at the end of the day, Day Postmaster is able to tell you they just converted to your website. Right. So we have to go through that exercise.
Yeah, and actually, just to kind of piggyback on that, I was thinking of something that Nick Hartofilis said before. The reality is on adults 18 to 49, on adults 18 to 34, yeah, you're dealing with the constant reduction in availability of those impressions and the growth of cost on those demos. But when you move the conversation to a business outcome, all of a sudden the erosion is not as bad. The cost increases that advertisers face are not as bad. And so it's pretty crucial to move beyond just that traditional bucket that we used as a proxy, because that's a really great way to help you mitigate inflation as a brand.
John, anything to add?
Yeah, well, it's funny you said bushel. I always think of it as like a liter. Like what goes into the liter actually matters. Like, is it a liter of water? Is it a liter of wine? Is it a liter of Pappy Van Winkle or something like that, right? And a GRP is kind of like a liter. Like what's in the liter? What's making it up? Right. The audiences matter. You can package up that liter so differently. So thinking of like a Nielsen rating point as a currency is kind of weird, right? Because it's truly not a currency. It's the audiences behind it that truly matter. And having a better data set to shine a light on the audiences you're delivering and having the systems in place to allow you to target those audiences on your inventory is so key.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about, advertisers, advanced TV, and sort of how it works for brand building, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. As you're having conversations with advertisers, do they understand that these capabilities can be leveraged every place in the funnel? And it's not just a capability that allows a brand to drive bottom line sales?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about sophisticated marketers at brands and at agencies who have always known the value of television for upper funnel, awareness and consideration metrics, and now we're finally able to put lower funnel, foot traffic, sales, those types of metrics against it. I think the fear of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, the idea that we're all just going to focus on the lower funnel value of television at the expense of the upper funnel, I think that's really overblown because, we're all pretty sophisticated.
And it's just riddled with misconceptions, right? So, if I want upper funnel, I'm going to go to my TV partner, but if I want lower funnel, I'm going to Google and Facebook. Over the past year, we've started to invest a lot of time and energy in thinking about the direct-to-consumer brands, right, and how they look at it.
Sure.
And so we have a department now, direct-to-scale, that has sort of reset their expectation there because it's the last point of attribution, the credit that you get. Sure, you might have looked at your Google performance, saw that you searched for something and went to the product's homepage, but at the end of the day, was it because you were sitting on your couch and immediately saw that advertisement? So is that just a funnel happening in a blink of an eye, or is that TV actually getting some sort of credit for a lower funnel metric, right?
Right. So John, where, as you think about data plus math and its evolution, one of the things I worry about is we can measure outcomes, but we don't explain why outcomes happened, right? You know, we could see the response, but we actually don't really understand the underlying variables of the response. Like, what's your wish of other data, or what do you do typically to align other data beyond media exposure and sales to be able to do the work you do?
So I guess you have to go into the problem realizing you're never going to have all the data, right? You have to know that out of the gate, because you're never going to know if your neighbor recommended the car to you or something like that. That's just not something that's publicly available or even privately available for you to do analytics against. So with all of the attribution work that we do, we have to really calculate a baseline. You know, what would have happened in the absence of the media that we're measuring? And that's a pretty straightforward thing to do when you've got addressable media.
Yep.
And it's a little bit more complicated when you've got linear television. And it's really complicated when you live in a world of both, which is where we typically are living these days, where there's a mixture of linear TV ads, where you can't really have a control group that you're holding out. You can't tell somebody not to watch ESPN right now because they're in your control group. You can't control them. But addressable, you can have control groups, and on streaming, you can have control groups. What Data Plus Math does is we operate in a world where we have a synthetic control group for linear, we can have control groups on the addressable or streaming side, and then we're measuring the lift against that. And if you do it right, those other factors should get caught up in that baseline, and you should be able to measure a lift over the baseline.
So things like seasonality.
Yep, exactly.
Things like that. Dominick, talk a little bit about what NBCU is doing in terms of ad smart context, because it sort of gets to this point of we're in this race to make sure we target well,
Right.
but are we doing enough other things to say beyond targeting, there are other things you could do to give the advertiser a better chance of response than not?
Yep.
So talk a little bit.
It always reminds me back when earlier in my career, I'd go to conferences, and on the panels, they'd ask the question, what's the future of targeted advertising? And the person would say, everything is targeted. And I just remember thinking, I just fundamentally disagreed with that. And sitting in NBC, we specifically see that when you're running things, sponsorships on Super Bowls and Olympics and the great content there. And so there's definitely going to be some world where the two have to coexist. And we started to look at what we did with the sponsorships, and it's just such a high-touch type of process and with a premium price. And there was a lot of thought put into making sure the brand was very relevant to that program that they assigned themselves to. And so we started to look at it and say, well, why not be able to do that at more scale with the scenes on shows or movies where we weren't paying attention to? And so, for example, let's pretend a movie is starting to segue into a commercial break, and there's a great scene where James Bond is shaving in the mirror, and this is exactly something that we saw and we tested internally. Well, then right after that, why is there not a Gillette ad or a Dollar Shave Club ad? And so there's a way to bring context at greater scale on a lot of the programming.
Yep. Ethan, is A&E doing anything similar?
Well, I mean, I was actually just thinking about something that was said earlier, and the idea that the creative execution is so much a part of the actual end result, along with the targeting, and we still have, as an industry, huge challenges in terms of swapping out linear creative on a timeline that can impact that. That is, that's something that we're working on because it's pretty critical.
And we talked about this earlier last week, but it's also like with the targeted advertising, you're dealing with creative that, in theory, was designed for the target audience that potentially you're receiving to run programmatically or addressably. With this ad smart contextual product, it's almost like flipping and saying, now we have the creative, let's make a decision on where that could fit. And I think we're challenged with that all the time on the publisher side.
But you could place the spot in the right place relative to the context.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Bill Harvey driver tag. Sort of does the same thing. Right. So in a couple of years, what's your view? Is there'll obviously be an upfront because the publishers need the upfront mechanism to build content, right? I don't know that any any company is going to greenlight a very expensive original show without knowing there's an upfront market to support it. But do the dynamics of the upfront look different as advanced TV scales more broadly?
Yep. So I'll hop in first on this one. So there will absolutely be an upfront. It's an incredibly efficient process. When you think about the amount of dollars that are transacted and the number of hours dedicated to those transactions, like, it's an awesome thing. A lot of great stuff gets done during the upfronts, and I don't see it going away. I do think there's going to be more collaboration around new and different data sets. You know, we're often kind of a third party brought in to help facilitate that between these advertisers and agencies and the media sellers. Being able to leverage potentially first-party data that the advertiser can bring to the table in partnership with their agency and the media seller to come up with some of these business outcome-driven metrics.
What do you guys think?
The upfront it's an effective and efficient futures market for both sides of the desk. The reality is that there's just a lot more work to be done after it's over, right? The idea that you've secured these pools of inventory, and then what are you going to do with those pools of inventory to make sure they work against business outcomes? That's just a lot more work on the back end than we've had before, but it remains.
Yeah, I think the timing is actually what changes the most. I think when I first joined NBC like 4 years ago, they were saying that it was February when the upfront conversation was going to start. Now, this year, I'm being told by September I need to make sure they're prepared for CES to have the conversation. Yeah, so I think what you're going to see is just not going to be this seasonal spike of activity. If we're going to make dramatic changes in how you're transacting with us, all the infrastructure, all the new technology, all the currency and business model changes, they need to be ready to go by the time you're in May. Like
a year from now, if we're having this event here, what will have happened for you guys to feel like you really nailed it?
I think realistically, some kind of substantial progress on deduplication and frequency capping, the ability to truly plan, sell, and then for the other side to buy cross-platform. That's the next big kind of domino to fall.
Does that mean that eventually you're transacting based on cross-platform reach and frequency guarantees?
That's the dream.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to be redundant, so I'll pick something different because that's definitely a great point. But for NBC specifically, what we're doing with Peacock and bringing to light a streaming service that is going to welcome brands and advertisers in versus shutting them off with an SVOD model, I think we're looking forward to see how that can disrupt the marketplace.
Great. And John?
I'll build whatever these guys want.
All right. Well, thanks for a great conversation, guys.